an original.
From Story Studio Network.
The 2030 Project is a Story Studio Network podcast sponsored by Daily Bread Food Bank, a Toronto-based charity whose mission is to collaborate with all to eliminate food insecurity and advocate for solutions to end poverty. What would it take to eliminate poverty in Canada by the year 2030? This is the 2030 Project. It's a podcast that explores why poverty persists and what we can do about it in this country. We endeavor to uncover what's been successful with Canada's poverty reduction strategy, but then what needs to come next. The 2030 Project tackles some of the biggest and the most pressing social issues facing this country today. I'm Dave Trafford, and thanks for joining us. One of the big issues that we have to face eternally when we start talking about mitigating the effects of poverty or mitigating poverty at all, it comes back to housing. And Neil Hetherington has often said, the CEO at Daily Bread, that the number one tool to eliminate poverty is home ownership. And we talk a lot about affordable housing, and certainly we focus on rent. But, home ownership is one of those things that really provides stability to people's lives, their health, their kids' education, all those sorts of things, sense of community. And it's so obvious. We all know that it's the number one issue. It may be, and I hear a lot of people just say it's unattainable. So we're going to try and solve that problem here in the next 20, 25 minutes. So around the table, we have Ian Jones. He is the president of BGI Group. David Reycraft is the Director of Housing Services at Dixon Hall. Julia Deans is the President and CEO at Habitat for Humanity Canada. And Kegan Harris is the Director of Housing Development at the Neighbourhood Group. And one of the things that I like to say, and what's missing from this panel, is any government voice. And I'm not saying we should exclude them. But the reason that you're all here is because in some form or fashion, you have taken on some of this weight in terms of the housing crisis that we have in various forms and in various parts of the demographic. Ian, I know that you and I have chatted in the past about this need for, there's a bit of a housing gap demographically at the sort of the older end of the demographic. We're going to find that some of the challenges with homelessness perhaps are at the younger end of the demographic. Just generally, in terms of your experience as a developer and in the private sector where you overlap with the nonprofit sector, is there low-hanging fruit based on what you're seeing that we're missing an opportunity that's right in front of us to get this ball rolling in the right direction?
As a developer, since 1980, we've always been looking for the profit venture as well as the social good. But frankly, the social good, takes a back seat to the profit margin part, and that isn't, from a point of view agreed as a lot of people would think it would be the case. But what's happening right now is one of the main reasons for the profit margin trying to be healthy, because if the house of cards starts to fall, you have to have some firewalls, and that's part of what we have tried to instill over the decades, and thankfully avoided bankruptcy. So the model that we've come up with is not for everybody, but it is for a major portion of the demographic, as you mentioned, and specifically it's designed for the 55 to 75 cohort, the boomer generation. And I'm on the leading edge of it, so I know what a lot of my peers are looking for. So I view that as the low-hanging fruit, although it's a gigantic low-hanging fruit, because they basically have two choices unless they live in their own home. And that comes with its set of challenges like loneliness and falls and burns, but they're either on a 5 to 10 year waiting list for affordable apartments, or 5,000 or 6,000 a month for a retirement home. So the Joy concept is designed to be it from $1,300 a month. And we're sticking with that as long as we can. We know the construction costs are going up, et cetera, and everything is more difficult today. But we don't have any doubt that we can do this. And with the depth of the market that I've described, I don't have any doubt that it will be accepted and absorbed, both here and in the US, because we're active there too.
So when you have actually built this development, as I recall, on that Joy model, the idea is that you have set it up. We were going to have housing that's available for that cohort, 55 plus. But you more or less walk away from the management of that property. Is that right?
Well, not only the management, but the ownership. This Joy concept is our, principal focus, and it is most definitely a philanthropic non-profit model. So basically what we do is we source the sites, which are preferably, a current faith-based group or a non-profit group, or even a municipality, frankly. We're talking to one or two of them right now about a new form of public housing. And basically what we do is we take it through the approvals, we build it, we fill it, we put in place a property management company who will master lease the building. And then when it's stabilized, we turn the land back to the charity or non-profit with a building on it. And it's theirs 100% from that point on. And part of the reason, and a lot of developers won't do this, but part of the reason is we're not taking out our profit margin or equity that's going into it. We're leaving that in place as a second mortgage at zero interest and zero principal payments for 10 years. So what that does is that allows the first mortgage, which is 99% going to be CMHC, whose debt service cover is 1.1. Our model is 1.7. So it really checks all the boxes with the CMHC.
The key to this is that we're talking about, I know you've been doing it a long time, but it starts to rise to the top when we start to have this conversation, because for me, it illustrates the need to be innovative. And I guess, at the other end of the spectrum, David Reycraft, you have, people who are living on the streets, or you're trying to get into shelters at best. So there's a real spectrum that we have to really focus on when we talk about the homeless, the affordable housing issue. And, Ian's got such a great idea, but again, we sit there and look at it as only one part of the affordable housing concern and crisis. And I know you've been in the business a while doing this. At what point do you think we're going to be able to pull a thread from where you are to where Julia is to where Ian is?
And are you talking about home ownership in particular, or just access to affordable and deeply affordable housing for the populations that are?
Well, I think we're going to have to start with affordable housing, in as much as, not everybody's going to have home ownership based on the way things are rolling out. Maybe that's our intended goal eventually, but Let's get people housed.
Yeah, and I think there has been some movement, and certainly people are feeling the pressure, and that is in large part because just prior to the pandemic, we accepted, and the City of Toronto and the country, that housing is a human right, and that's an issue that we need to be contending with, and we need to realize that over time. I understand that's not going to happen overnight. We have a 10-year housing plan that has some pretty robust goals in terms of creating affordable, supportive housing in the market, and redefining the affordability model as well, which I think is really critically important in a city like Toronto, where up until recently, 80% of average market rent was not affordable for most people living in the city of Toronto. Yes, Dixon serves the housing services team in particular serves a population that is most marginalized and vulnerable. And, some of the things that we've seen in response to the COVID crisis are heartening, right? Like, we have health systems that are working with us in the shelter system, in the shelter hotels in particular, in ways that we never have. We are working with harm reduction teams in ways that we never have, and we're better understanding the people who are farthest from the housing market, and we continue to house those individuals, and we continue to work with our government, particularly the municipality, to assure that people get access to affordable housing.
Julia, I know that, let's face it, we've got this rich history in terms of what Habitat has been doing and Habitat has managed to do over the years, certainly not just in Canada, but starting in the United States, around the world. I know you have your global initiatives that the Canadian team is heavily involved in. Give us your sort of lay of the land from that perspective, because you aren't talking about rent. You're talking about, this is always about home ownership.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I was really interested in Ian's comment that if the house starts to fall down, you need some firewalls. And I think that's what we're all after for everyone. And at Habitat, we're known for building and selling to working families homes. But what we're really after is that stability and security and savings that comes with home ownership, those attributes of home ownership. And it may not be, home ownership may not be feasible for everyone, but we certainly want people to have those attributes. And that is everywhere along that housing spectrum. So I think when we know there's need everywhere along the housing spectrum. There are over 1.6 million Canadians who are in core housing need, and that's seniors, and it's people who are living in transitional housing, and it's working families with kids who just can't get that down payment together. So I think from where we sit, we are focused on home ownership, but it's the attributes of home ownership that matter to us, and and everything that happens along the spectrum matters to us, and we matter to them as well, because you need places for people to go along the spectrum, and that's why we support the work that David's doing, and we look to the work that Ian's doing with a lot of excitement. We need all hands on deck at every
Well, and it's interesting too, and from your perspective, Kegan, when you talk about the Neighbourhood Group, the emphasis is on the community as well, and I think that's an important part of stable, affordable housing, and we underestimate or understate sometimes, I think, the value and the importance of stability in our own neighborhood community and what it gives to our kids, what it gives to our seniors, what it just, how we can relate to each other. And it's, considering what we've gone through, it's a major factor in our mental health.
Absolutely. And, when you look at affordable housing and the impact that it has on communities and neighborhoods, it's generally very positive, especially with supportive housing. It doesn't just benefit the residents or the tenants of the building themselves. It has an overarching, very positive benefit for the community as a whole. I mean, I look to when COVID first started, we at the Neighbourhood Group, we put together an outdoor community concert. I think it was the second or third week that everything was in lockdown. We had a band perform on the front yard, so we had community members all out on their front yards watching this concert. We had all our neighborhoods, so we were able to manage to create this really community unifying event. While following those guidelines, while everyone was scared about what's going on with affordable housing. And I mean, that's just one of the many ways that communities can be really brought together around the issues of affordable housing. We've done a lot of work now with the city in their first phase of modular housing. We worked very extensively with the communities in those neighborhoods to kind of get a sense of what those concerns were, to kind of break down some of those NIMBYist perspectives that community members have had. And, what we were finding in those communications were people were bringing up concerns that they had about the neighborhood in general. And we were able to work with the community to identify and address those. And now, those communities are in very accepting, welcoming kind of environments for these kind of hotly contested supportive housing projects that we just opened. In fact, we're having another big community event this weekend at one of our sites. And again, it speaks to just how unifying the investment of affordable housing can be beyond just the direct benefit to tenants and residents in the building.
Well, okay, just pick up on that point, David, because and I wonder whether or not, and for God's sake, I'm not cheering for COVID here, but the idea that the lesson learned, if nothing else, was to Kegan's point that we have to have a mature conversation on both sides, or maybe several sides, when it comes to NIMBYism, when it comes to the stigma of having, shelters in the neighborhood. Have we progressed there from your perspective in terms of being more open to those conversations?
I think so. I mean, I'm interested in what Kegan's talking about, and I think that we're a city that has celebrated the notions of diversity and accessibility for a long time, but really we have an opportunity to redefine those things and to think about what that means in terms of diverse communities, economically diverse communities, culturally diverse communities. Those are really important. These are the ways that we define ourselves as a city, and these are the stories that we need to be telling the individuals who live in these neighborhoods. So we have traveled a distance, and Kegan, I live on Dovercourt Road, where the Neighbourhood Group and the Neighbourhood Group has one of their sites, and the community really came out to support that project. Now, there are always going to be challenges around the day-to-day, the quotidian of those relationships and those affordable and supportive projects. But generally, I think we're traveling a distance. We've traveled a distance. We're engaging with community differently, and those things are really positive. And also, I think our governments are also making communities responsible for making affordable and supportive housing accessible in each and every community across the city.
So as soon as we step into that environment, though, I think we start to talk about government involvement. There are regulations at City Hall that get in the way of doing exactly what we're trying to do, all things considered. And whether or not that's, gentle density or whatever we're going to call it, to me, the more I listen and the more I think and hear about this specific topic, it's almost as if we don't need government regulation. We need government to set a standard of excellence or a standard of expectation and then get out of the way.
I appreciate the tenor of the comment, but I think the government's role is very, very important to affordable housing, not for the developer side because they are the market and the market is made, but affordable housing is not a market and the market is not made, and we need government to be standing alongside us as affordable housing developers. And the two big things we face issues with are land and NIMBYism. And we hear a lot of municipalities saying we can't do anything on the land front, but they certainly can by having affordable housing policies, by having land set-asides, by having speedier approvals processes, by allowing denser development. And we're seeing some great examples of that across the country, from Victoria to London, Ontario. So it's happening. And too many municipalities are saying we can't do it. We don't know what to do. And on the NIMBYism front, same thing. We need them to have resolve, and we need to stand beside them and say why it's important. And I think that the time is really now. And we need our provincial governments and the federal government to be echoing and supporting that as well. But without that, we are constantly competing with for-profit developers, and we're losing.
Well, I guess my point about government getting out of its own way, though, is sort of the other side of what you're exactly saying. That in fact, we're going to set the standard. We're going to say that this is a requirement in a community, that municipalities are the pointy end of that spear for sure.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. Over the course of the campaign, during the election campaign in Ontario, too often I was hearing mayors and municipalities saying, can't be doing that here.
Yeah.
This is where the province steps in, might be to set a standard. The feds are going to have their national housing strategy, which I understand. Yeah. But to the municipalities, too often they become the NIMBYists, right?
Yeah. No, I'm completely with you, but it would probably make people's heads spin to know how many municipalities have no affordable housing policy whatsoever. And we had an opportunity in the last provincial election for the government to get very bold on that and support municipalities. And I think they were behind the people on that. I think people recognize that this is a big issue for everybody and for every community, and the time is now.
Well, and again, talking about what Ian's doing, and he's been doing it for decades. And Kegan, you alluded to the modular housing, and we talk about that stuff as if it just happened overnight. There's been talk about this, and the developments have been in place for years. And so I wonder how we became such an overnight success all of a sudden after decades of putting time and energy into this stuff.
Well, it's interesting. When I first started getting into this work of doing more housing development and things like that. I had come from a background of trying to find people experiencing homelessness housing. There wasn't anyone there, so I was asked if I wanted to help build housing, and I got joined in from that. And one of the first conversations I had with someone is said, it's a really big issue, but it has a really simple solution that a lot of people aren't talking about. And that simple solution is we just need more housing. Like bottom line, baseline, that's the solution. We just need more housing, and there needs to be more housing that are, either, affordable home ownership, affordable renting. And I mean, how we get, like, obviously it's not as simple as just building housing and making it affordable. There's a lot of things that we have to do to kind of get into it. But I mean, that's really the guiding philosophy. And I think, certainly at the federal level as well as the municipal level, I think that philosophy has kind of certainly grabbed them a little bit. I know in the discussions that I've had with other nonprofits as well as some of the developers, is that philosophy is kind of getting more ingrained, where it's like, rather than exploring like all these complex kind of solutions, the focus seems to kind of be, we just need to get more housing. Like, you look at the work that Ian and what they're doing is they're doing something that's looking to bring in more affordable housing. You look at the group Habitat for Humanity is doing, the work that Habitat for Humanity is doing, they're bringing in more housing. David with Dixon Hall, us at the Neighbourhood Group, it's just, you've got all these different groups working together just trying to bring more housing in. And to me, that does speak to kind of the positivity and kind of forms the answer to your question, in that you're seeing a lot more people just kind of, they're seeing that as a goal, is bringing in more housing. And it's just, there are so many different ways to do it, and so many people are kind of falling into those ways of doing it, and they're just working to get it done.
So at what point then, maybe we can just go around the table here before we close, and I'd be curious to get your sense of the problem that needs the most critical attention right now in your lane, David, but perhaps the behavior that you have seen shift over the last 2.5, 3 years since COVID that gives us some level of positivity or optimism that you might not have otherwise seen if it weren't for the shutdowns.
I would echo what Kegan is saying. We need more housing. We also need more supported housing. And one of the things that I have seen over the course of the pandemic is that different levels of government have come together to support some of the most vulnerable men and women in our city and communities in our city. There's always the fear, and we're actually beginning to see some of that now as austerity wins the day. And those supports are being clawed back, which is really complicated to think about, because we have been able to redefine how we work as shelter providers and emergency shelter providers in the city of Toronto as we move toward focusing on building a more robust housing ecosystem. We need to be able to support the most vulnerable in our cities, and without that support, housing will not be successful.
So what was the optimism that you might have otherwise gleaned that you wouldn't have expected after or having gone through the pandemic?
Well, I think that people come around. Like I also, I think community is a really critical part of this. And early on in the pandemic, it was a chaotic world for all of us, particularly those of us providing emergency responses to the homeless community. But over time, these shelter hotels have really demonstrated that people can be successful in housing with the right constellation of supports and the support from community. We know that the most vulnerable and the most complex realities of homelessness can be solved.
Julia, a thought from just in terms of what is your initial focus, the immediate right in front of you, and the thing that you might have learned that you hadn't expected?
Yeah, well, sort of two things happened. First is we all knew that housing is pretty essential to leading a secure and stable life and achieving your potential. But now everybody knows too, and everybody knows that without good housing, you can be very, very vulnerable and you can die. So that was a big aha. The other thing is the awareness of how significant our housing crisis is, and then it's now not somebody else's problem. It's your kid's problem. It's the people you interact with every day. So I think that we've got that momentum of awareness that we can capitalize on, and those are people we can count as advocates to get the kind of policy environments and funding environments. We need to do the good work we do because we can't count on the private sector to do it. That's not what they do, but we can make the market on this front. And as you said earlier to David, as charities, we want to put ourselves out of business. That's our goal. And I feel like we've got some wind in our sails to make a little bit of a dent on that sooner rather than later.
Just to that point, though, the idea is that, you know or you think or you feel, and I hear this often in this context of this conversation, that government is listening. But somebody said, but are you being heard?
I know we're being heard. We had not dealt with government from Habitat for Humanity until quite recently, when Canada finally got a national housing strategy. But we do feel heard, and we feel that we can use the voice we have to advocate for others who aren't being heard in the affordable housing world, and we will be doing that.
Ian, I think that you are an example of, on a whole bunch of levels, what we would like this whole process to look like, and just in terms of the philanthropy of it, the spirit of the community, but there's innovation here in terms of what you're doing. And I would hope that if nothing else comes out of your project, others will look at it and say, we can build the box differently. We can build the model differently. And you've been brave enough to do that. That's just my comment off the top. Second thing is, where is it that you go? You can see that, we need this addressed now, and perhaps that level of unexpected optimism that you might have gleaned from the experience in COVID.
I'm under no illusion that we can meet the demand that I've described. So, but we're going to do it formally. We've licensed the copyrights a few years ago. So we'll be licensing the Joy concept for other like-minded philanthropic developers, etc., to do. So that'll hopefully scale it up, faster than us trying to do half a dozen projects type thing. But I want to leave you with 2 points of optimism. One is constructive, the other is destructive, but it's still a point of optimism. And the constructive one, Julia touched on. Use Victoria as a model. Basically, if you're going to build non-profit, affordable housing, there are no regulations. You'll get your permit and you'll get it soon. Now, when I say no regulations, obviously, if it's being built in contaminated soil, all of that's going to have to be done. And if Ontario would bring that in, pre-zone the municipalities with the Victoria model, and basically put a housing czar in place that can override the municipalities. And I'm not saying roughshod, but this is a serious crisis here, and something has to be done about it. The other case for optimism is actually a destructive model. In 1990, we developed 150 odd high-rise condos in Milton, and the market tanked with the raise of interest rates. Sound familiar? All the suites were sold around 135,000 a piece. We ended up having to sell those at 50,000 a piece through an auction, and it brought down Confederation Life, the largest insurance company in Canada, not just for us, but the point being is that today there's 50,000 pre-sales, condo pre-sales out there, and many won't close with one thing and another, with the increase in cost. If they end up defaulting, they will reduce their prices drastically just to try and make sure the bank doesn't call their loan, the construction loan. So they'll lose everything, but they won't go bankrupt. And those units will be 200,000 and 300,000 less than they are today in the stratosphere. And that may not be enough, but there's thousands out there, and if they're all tripping over each other to save themselves, there's your answer for affordable housing.
Well, you're right. It's not optimistic, but it is probably an effective tool in terms of bringing the cost of housing down. Kegan, what do you think?
It's certainly heartening to see that in the last, specifically, I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a lot of investment into affordable housing from the municipal level as well as the federal level. Obviously, the national housing strategy is a big win. And you're seeing a lot more affordable housing developments happening, especially in the city of Toronto, even outside of Toronto, you're seeing a lot of it happening. So it is really an exciting time to be part of nonprofit housing development. Is it perfect? Are there things that we would like to see better? Yeah, absolutely. I think there could be a lot of work done specifically in giving nonprofits the tool to acquire their own land for developing. There could be better tools to get, other nonprofits their foot in the door, because I do believe that nonprofit organizations really hold the key and the answers in partnership with others for developments. That being said, with a lot of the positives that are happening right now, I think it's easy to start looking and hoping and work with others to ensure that we eventually, build off of what's happening right now to get to that point. And you are seeing, there's the Rapid Housing Initiative through the federal government. There's these other projects that are coming out, the MURA program through the city. Like, there's a lot of things coming out that are beginning to meet those needs. And, it's all about continually improving that process as we go forward. I think, we're trying to build something that's going to, it is a huge problem. We're trying to build systems and processes in place to solve that big problem. And as long as we continually chip away at it, we continue to work to each other, it feels like there's an optimism that we'll get there.
Well, and I think that the recognition, if nothing else, and this group has certainly described it, is that there's a spectrum of concern, and the crisis is on a fairly broad spectrum, but it would appear to be within the peripheral vision of those who need to be paying attention to it, and that's including just the average person right through to City Hall, Queen's Park, Parliament Hill. So, listen, thanks for joining us. David, Kegan, Ian, Julia, great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. Thanks all.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 2030 Project. We would encourage you to subscribe to this show. We're on Apple and Spotify, Google, Audible, pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. We'd also be grateful if you'd offer a rating on the show. We'd love your thoughts, your feedback, even your criticism. The 2030 Project podcast series is sponsored by Daily Bread Food Bank, a Toronto-based charity whose mission is to collaborate with all to eliminate food insecurity and advocate for solutions to end poverty. I'm Dave Trafford, and the 2030 Project is a Story Studio Network podcast produced by Eye Contact Productions.